So trends in residential solar and storage, what is the relationship between customer expectations and what utilities are actually offering to them? I don't really know, but that's why we have three great panelists to come up on stage and talk about it with us. We have the CEO of Demand IQ, Austin Rosenbaum. Executive Director at the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute, Dana Harmon. And Principal at Clean Power Marketing Group, Nancy Edwards. So for those in the audience who may not be familiar with you and the work you do, we'll just go down the line. Austin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Z-Prime does an awesome job every event I go to, so thank you for having me. I'm Austin Rosenbaum, founder and CEO of Demand IQ, and we help acquire solar customers for less through better services and software.
Good morning. I'm Dana Harmon, the Executive Director of the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute, or TEPRI. We work with utilities, affordable housing providers, and community organizations across the state of Texas to provide lasting energy solutions for low-income households.
Hi, I'm Nancy Edwards. I have a company called Clean Power Marketing Group, and I work with solar companies and other manufacturing companies and sustainability-driven enterprises to help accelerate the transition to clean energy.
So, Austin, I want to start with you. What are some of the biggest factors affecting customer buy-in of residential solar and storage today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, certainly the market is changing and has changed a lot, especially over the last 5 years, I think. We've seen a lot of growth in the residential sector, some in the commercial, and it's really a good thing. But a lot of the big changes are coming around price and consumer awareness of that, and the offering is getting to be really good at this point. And so I think consumers are really driven towards an opportunity that they now have to save. Not only are they doing something good for the environment, but they also have the ability to reduce their energy bill.
Nancy, what are some of the market forces you're seeing?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's been, I've been in solar since 2010, and I think there's been a little bit of a shift from early days when it was all about the environment to, now we are seeing people interested in price reduction, but I also think there's a sort of a multiplier effect of solar plus storage in companies like Tesla making a big brand impact and sort of capturing the attention of consumers and helping them imagine what might be different, how it might be different in the future. So yeah, I think it's a combined factor of all those things.
And Dana, you work a lot on the customer side. What are customers' expectations of these solar and storage programs when they're looking at them?
Well, we're at an interesting time because traditionally renters, low-income communities, especially communities of color, haven't really been able to take advantage of the benefits of solar energy, and we're starting to see changes there, which is really exciting. I think there's some really innovative models, both in terms of rooftop solar and community solar models that are making access possible where it wasn't possible before. We actually conducted a survey not too long ago here in San Antonio, as a matter of fact, with both low-income and non-low-income residents. And it was really interesting to see what mattered to them. The top four drivers of adoption were the same. People cared about maintenance and monitoring being taken care of. They cared about no startup costs and immediate savings. And 3 and 4 actually differed between non-low-income and low-income consumers. Number 3 for low-income consumers was clean energy for a cleaner future, with number 4 being able to monetize the ITC or federal tax credits. That flipped for non-low-income, where non-low-income consumers really, number 3 was the ITC and number 4 was clean energy for a cleaner future, which we thought was really interesting.
That is really, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's one data set, it's one survey, but I think what it shows is that low-income people care about clean energy, which wasn't the case before, and that we have to make it cost-effective in a way that meets their lifestyle and their needs.
So, they're interested. So then what are some of the challenges to increasing buy-in, Austin?
I think certainly there's a little bit of an issue with trust right now, and some of it's around awareness, but increasing the trust with the product and with the folks that are selling it. I think that's an opportunity to partner with co-brand with other trusted institutions and things like that to be able to get to garner the trust needed to get the product in the market. I think that Nancy, you mentioned the Tesla sort of splash that they made with the solar roof, and I think just getting an attractive product out there that people can get behind and say, yeah, I want that on my roof. I think that's been a really good thing for the industry. But I think we're headed in the right direction. We've made a lot of strides.
Nancy, what are some of the challenges you're seeing?
I agree with that. I think there's a big, I'm sure everybody in the room is aware, there's a lot of disinformation in the solar industry and a lot of confusion around how exactly it works and what all the incentives are and the changing landscape in terms of tariffs. And it just creates a lot of questions in the consumer's mind, and anytime there are questions, the barriers are always higher. So I think, recent news about Walmart fires on the roofs with solar does not help. So anything we can do to reassure the public that this is a viable technology and that this is, these are all kind of issues that have been dealt with, then we'll be helping.
And Dana, round it out.
So I certainly agree with Austin and Nancy's comments about, awareness and trust are two key issues, certainly, but also would like to bring up quality of housing stock. And accessibility and home ownership as being kind of two key issues, and really just kind of a general uncertainty of life circumstances, whether that means it's a lack of housing stability or just folks moving, which was very common in the population that we're serving. I also wanted to bring up a point related to housing about, a lot of people think that solar isn't for low-income people. They think that there are other services that may be more appropriate. I was on one of these panels not too long ago, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I think you're trying to put high heels on a kangaroo and it doesn't fit. I would argue with that statement. I think solar and storage absolutely have a place, and there's kind of this continuum where moving from a place where we need to get folks in stable situations where there's a place for utility assistance, bill assistance. Then we need to look at our tried and true tools of weatherization, energy efficiency, making sure the building envelope is secure. And then there's absolutely a place for cost-effective solar installations or solar plus storage that's adding resiliency. I think we just need to get to a point that we're designing our products and services that kind of take advantage of that reality, and then also explore options like community solar, which I've mentioned, which do make solar available for renters and people who may not have access to capital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I also think there's a communication piece. As an anecdote, I was talking with my grandfather last week. He was explaining to me that he wants to look into getting some solar on his roof because he's on a fixed income, and the utility jacks up the rates about 5% every year, and there's nice tax incentives through Washington State and net metering available, and it's just really sunny where he lives. So it would really be able to help him with his energy burden. But he hasn't the foggiest on how to actually go about doing that. The utility hasn't really helped him link with any partners. So, Nancy, you work in the marketing side of this. How can the dialogue improve to sort of better give access to the people who want it?
Yeah. Well, I do think it has to be clearer communications, also more consistent. But the more that we can enable a collaboration between utilities and installers, the better, because, for example, in Austin, they have a pretty robust solar program, but we also have an education effort from Austin Energy to help consumers become aware of what are the steps to go through to take solar and what are the things they need to look for in a reputable installer. So things like that, and then I just encourage my clients to be very upfront and have very impeccable business practices, and not engage in sort of the lowest common denominator, no money down sort of used car tactics that we've seen in the past. So I think all of that can help.
Austin, what do you think can be done to reduce confusion in the marketplace?
I think it probably has to start with opening better lines of communication between the providers, the installers, and the utilities, and ultimately discussing ways of better educating the customers together. I think there's a lot of confusion. In Colorado, we've seen issues with providers affiliating themselves with the utilities, and it just confuses the buyer. And so ultimately, we just need to make it clear that sometimes there may be programs and opportunities to get solar through your utility, or whether it's community solar, or there's some instances of rooftop solar through utilities. But here's what the installers do, and here's what your utility is still going to do as a support mechanism to solar. So,
is there a direct way that the installers could appeal directly to the customer rather than having to funnel it through the utility?
I think that they're doing a pretty good job of trying to go straight to consumer right now, but ultimately just reinforcing what the roles are of the utility and what the role will be of the installer going forward once they install solar, once they get subscribed to community solar. And I think that it all just kind of starts with the education of, okay, so you've still got poles and wires, and if you don't have a battery, you're going to be offline still when the power goes out. Here's the support you're getting from the utility, and here's how many kilowatt hours you're going to get out of your system. And so I think there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of education.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sorry, that, there are, tons of installers speaking directly to consumers. What I was suggesting was just that utilities have an opportunity to do more of the heavy lifting when it comes to education. And, if you're going to be a pro-solar, pro-renewables utility, then you should have an education effort that is behind that, but to then make clear the roles and responsibilities of the installers and the contractors in that.
And I agree with you, Nancy, on the education program in Austin is, it's quite special and I think quite effective, and it's working. But I also don't want to downplay the value of using trusted community channels, community-based organizations. There's a local developer here in San Antonio who's partnered with a group called Westside Development Corporation to get their message out. Go Smart Solar, who's in the audience. And I think that's been really effective for reaching certain consumer segments by going through those trusted channels, whether it's an economic development group or a faith-based organization or otherwise, because then going back to the trust piece, it's a way to get the message out there.
Do you have a good example of a communication strategy that utilize those channels?
There's the Solarized programs that I think have been very effective. I know that there are a number across the nation. The Solarized, it's sort of a group buy offer, I believe, and I'm not like a super expert on those at all, but I think those have been pretty effective. I think they fill up very fast, and they've been a good way of building trust and making sure you're working with a quality provider, and consumers seem to be interested in that offer.
Right. So what's changed in the way that solar programs are marketed from the past, and what still needs to change in that marketing strategy?
So, as I was saying in the past, it was much more about, well, it still is to some degree about driving cost as a value proposition and cost savings. That is, inherently what consumers will respond to. But I do see the possibility moving forward to have a kind of grander vision. I have a grander vision of the solar plus storage being able to help people imagine transitioning their homes, transitioning their lives to a less carbon-intensive lifestyle. And I think that especially younger people moving up are much more responsive to that. So it's kind of an interesting time we're in, because we have been transitioning to this like all about cost savings message, which is good, and a lot of people respond to that, but there's also a lot of awareness around environmental issues and sustainability, and so that's kind of another opportunity, I think.
So is that to say that we're kind of moving away from having incentives be the center of the piece?
Right. Yeah, and I think it's doing a disservice to your target, to your potential audience, to only drive on cost, because many people, especially with solar plus storage, respond to the resiliency message and just the total independence message to choice.
Yeah, it's reflected in the survey that Dana just mentioned.
And I wanted to also mention, just in terms of the size of the market, NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, came out with a study not too long ago that was really interesting, saying that nearly half of all of the residential solar technical potential in the US is on the rooftops of low to moderate income residents. And so it was representing 320 gigawatts of potential across the US.
Yeah.
But they also went on to say that 60% of that residential potential doesn't conform to the traditional solar model of single-family owner-occupied housing. And so I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge that, and then also recognize, and us really speaking from the low-income and disadvantaged community perspective, that low-income people, just like any group of people, are certainly not homogenous. Mm-hmm. And I think segmentation, from a marketing perspective, plays a really important role in, recognizing that, a retired couple on a fixed income who owns their own home is very different than, a single father in an apartment who may be a teacher or a nurse, and that's very different than someone on the verge of homelessness. And so kind of recognizing those segments and tailoring messaging and marketing to fit their needs, I think is and I can't say that it has changed, but I think it is changing in terms of outreach to this consumer segment.
So to that end, where are opportunities for new investments or new customers?
I think that there's a new offering that's sort of emerging right now, and that's community solar and the favorable contract terms that maybe are emerging around, like less than maybe even just a short 1-year contract with no credit requirements. I mean, these are sort of in pilot right now, but that will certainly address the low and middle income segments in a much better way, and that will open up access to those, that large population that's currently not being served with solar, sort of evening it out and creating equity.
Agreed. And forgive me, I'm a researcher, so I love to quote research, but Berkeley just came out with a study too that I thought was really interesting, saying that Black and Hispanic majority census tracts average significantly less adoption. And many people assume that that's due to income or home ownership qualities, but actually when the study controlled for those variables, for income and home ownership, the disparity was still there. So I do think it's important to kind of recognize that racial and ethnic component of the market that we're not reaching, in addition to low-income residents, all of which play into the equity discussion.
Definitely what they said, but also I just see like the expansion of business models and the ability of public and private entities to work together with affinity type groups, community development groups, to create new types of communities that you're already starting to see that enable a good variety of housing types and also clean energy. But there's just a huge potential on the tech side too, to automate this whole system. And financing, you're seeing a lot of improvements for sure. But if we could get to a place where people could just flip a switch and have all of their stuff be clean, then that's the holy grail. So I don't know how to do that, but y'all are much smarter than me. So somebody come up with that.
Well, and I think the financing point is super important. I think there are innovative financing models that are being developed, especially for people who may have lower credit scores or otherwise. But also, I think there's a really important opportunity to leverage disparate funding sources in this space. In a lot of the work that we do, we think that there's opportunity to leverage, for example, LIHEAP funding, the Federal Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, and weatherization funds with solar, and consider solar, and cost-effective measure for some of those programs that's more sustainable over time. Similarly, there's opportunity for utilizing Opportunity Zone funds or Community Reinvestment Act requirements from banks. And all this stuff is, it's tricky to put all this together, right? I don't mean to say that it's easy, but I think that there is a leverage opportunity there that we're working with others to try to take advantage of.
Yeah, and I think as the housing stock starts to, transition, this is all going to become almost more like business as usual, but we are the ones like crafting all of that right now. But yeah, you're seeing it in California with the wildfires that, it's much more difficult now to insure a home. So, all of this is going to become part of the public consciousness more and more. And to the extent that that happens, all of the funding sources open up and all the natural collaborations will occur, I believe.
So with that sort of, if you build it, they will come attitude, how do you go about building a good product to increase buy-in? Like, I know we mentioned community solar a lot, and the way that you design community solar has changed drastically. Where does design come into this?
Yeah, I think by design you mean the contract terms and the actual
Yes.
product offering itself. And I see that as, actually, I worked at a community solar company, that was before I worked at Z-Prime. And at the time, the product was really not a very good-looking opportunity. It wasn't very good-looking. It was a 20-year contract. It didn't go on your home. There was like a really high credit requirement, and it was really hard to sell. And so they were really relying on those hard sales tactics. And with the opportunity with the competition for capital for these projects, driving better, more favorable contract terms for consumers, there's an opportunity to sell the product differently, probably much more like you'd buy like a cell phone plan, or something closer to that. And I think that that's going to drive a lot of evolution and adoption. So.
Are you seeing something similar, Dana?
Similar, but I would say also just communities are different, and I think that community needs assessments are critical in order to design. And it's maybe programs that are offered by utilities and others more so than solar products, and there's some combination thereof. But I think involving the community from the beginning of a program design is really important. And the other thing that our survey here in San Antonio showed was making the customer financial expectations clear and concise is critical in a way that people understand what they're what they're signing up for and is transparent. Really goes a long way, I think, in terms of earning that trust again with the customer.
I feel like a broken record, but yeah, I just believe that service after the sale is part of your solution and part of your product, and so whatever we can do to just make solar, we've got a great product already. Solar's a great product. Solar plus storage is even more powerful. So let's make it simpler. Let's make it easier to procure, and then let's back it up when it's installed. That is going to help us with referrals, which is really your strongest form of marketing, and it's going to help the adoption rate overall.
This might be a bit presumptuous, but does anyone have any questions about this development that's going on? We got a gentleman right here. Do we have a mic?
I'm asking from two perspectives. One is I'm an advisor to Habitat for Humanity and Sustainability, and secondly, as an investor. In Austin and elsewhere, we've been building more and more net zero homes at Habitat. The solar panels are priced right into the mortgage, which is great. But adding solar panels to low-income groups is difficult, and many states have passed PACE legislation, property assessed clean energy. Those states that, not all states, but those states that have, most do not cover residential buildings. In Texas, as I understand, we don't cover residential buildings that are. Is anything being done to try to get PACE legislation amended or augmented to include residential buildings so that, as an investor, I find it very attractive investing in PACE contracts. It's a good return for the investor, but it's a great return for the homeowner.
So thank you for the question, and I'll answer the PACE question, but then I want to tell one other quick story after that. And please, I'm not a PACE expert by any means. My understanding is that commercial PACE does work for multifamily residential buildings, and so we've got that. But I also understand that while there is a call for something like residential PACE in Texas, I don't believe that it's, at least in the short term, in the near future, as I understand it. The other story, though, that I wanted to tell is I was actually at an event in Austin earlier this week about expanding access to solar and how might we do that and what might a program look like. And it was really interesting. I learned the story of a woman who was maybe 22 or 23 years old. And when we asked her about her relationship with energy generally, she said, the first thing she said was, well, I'm a millennial, and she did this, and she held up her phone, which of course was in her hand at the time. And she said, so I want everything to be easy, I want it to be right here, available, I pay all my bills online, and so she expected to communicate through that app. But then she went on to say, that she grew up in Atlanta in a home that was built by Habitat for Humanity. And she said she remembered that experience. She was very proud of that fact. She was very proud of her mother for how hard that she worked for her family. And she was proud of its energy consumption. And she said our energy bills were not high. The home was very well built. But what she really remembered was that her home was comfortable. She remembered her lived experience growing up in a home that Habitat for Humanity built was that she was comfortable. She wasn't too hot, she wasn't too cold, it wasn't drafty, and she obviously knew that this was the experience of some of her peers. And that resonated with her, and it made her care about energy now, which I thought was really an amazing story. She also said that until that meeting, solar wasn't really on her radar. It wasn't really something that she thought about. So here's a person who cares about energy, it matters to her, and we just hadn't reached her effectively. Not exactly answering your question, but I love that story.
Now, that's interesting, because that got me thinking, this isn't what you were saying, but I've heard a lot from people that I talk to about the future of like renewables and things like that, and they'll be like, well, obviously millennials, Gen Z people, they care a lot about climate change, so they're going to get into the energy industry and kind of make that sort of change, either by working in it or by being consumers. But I think that's true, but it kind of that thinking does a bit of a disservice to the people who are older and again, to bring it back to my grandfather, who want this technology that is available, but they have a harder time interacting online and being able to communicate and find those channels. So, is there a better way of reaching those customers?
I mean, I think we've certainly seen a variety of different ways of reaching customers. The industry started predominantly with door knocking. We've seen that move more online over the last few years, and things are moving more in different ways, like Messenger is becoming a way of reaching folks, like Facebook Messenger. Just looking at the right touch point for the right demographic and right segment of the market is really important. And I think what's really important is that customers want to understand the value of solar a little bit more without actually talking to someone first. So they sort of want that. So really, what does this look like for me? They want to know how big the system is. They want to know what the financial impact could be in a ballpark sort of estimate, and then what the environmental impact would be. And they don't want to necessarily talk to someone until they have some idea of what those look like, what those things look like. And so I think there's really a big opportunity to use technology to drive some of those educational pieces, and certainly using different touch points to deliver that information.
Yeah, I'm going to just keep saying, I really believe education from the utilities is important for that demographic in particular. But I also feel like, whatever we can do from community group standpoint to raise the visibility of solar as an option now is something. I can't tell you how frightening it is to, just yesterday I did a test online, where I went to a site, I won't say whose, and a major solar installer, national, and put in my information, just see what would happen. Inundated by phone calls, none of which were from that company. So it is not a good customer situation. It's not a good consumer education place that we're in. So whatever we can do to just harness the power of our collective intellect to approach that from a more compassionate place, I think would be good.
So Nancy, what would some of those best practices be for that communication?
So just make sure that as an installer, you have your house in order before you start to market. I can't tell you the number of times that, companies don't necessarily have the back-end systems to handle the lead flow, and also, make sure you have the staffing on hand to be able to do the customer interaction after the sale. So it's very much like, business practices, best business practices, but from a marketing standpoint, just make sure that you're doing, the right kind of SEO and the right kind of lead flow on your site, and just making sure that your house is in order.
Do we have any other audience questions? We got one up front here, and then one back there.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the panel. My name is Paul Watson, asking on behalf of Dividend Finance. I mean, when I joined, we were doing about 3 years ago, 60, 70 million in residential solar loans. And now we're almost at $1 billion in 3 years. So we've seen explosive growth, and on the marketing side, we see, I think of the farmers commercial. We know a thing or two because we see a thing or two. Florida's really scary to operate in, but one of the things that we're really looking at is how to get that 320 gigawatts. How do we access that market? And we're really looking at PACE, and obviously Resi PACE is not available here. We've been in PACE for a long time. Commercial PACE, we're running into hurdles with lender consent a lot of times on really ramping that up. But whenever you mention that, Dana, where are you seeing some finance options? Because even as a financer, we're finding a hard time with our capital stack and going to capital markets and accessing this market. So from your perspective, the word on the streets, what's really out there?
The word on the street. So again, I'm not a finance expert, but I think there are some groups that we turn to. For example, you guys may be familiar with Connecticut Green Bank. I think they have some really innovative models that do specifically work for low-income consumers or consumers with low credit. They actually have a spin out now called Inclusive Prosperity Capital, which is kind of taking that Connecticut Green Bank model and taking it nationwide. And I've been in talks with them about, what would it take to get that to Texas, for example. There's some other interesting methods evolving. There's a group out of the Northeast called Solstice who has an energy score, which is kind of like it's basically an alternative to a FICO score for assessing risks based on bill payment history, energy bill payment history. So I don't know the answer, but I think that there's innovation happening in the market that we're really excited to see, and to work with partners to figure out how we can find solutions that work.
Pace might be a good option.
Maybe.
And as you brought up different types of finance too, have you seen anything?
Well, I'm just seeing the expansion among national installers and among even panel manufacturers offering different types of financing for the not LMI necessarily, but for the other types. So it's more and more common to see a variety of lease financing, PPA, whatever. Yeah.
Makes sense. And I believe there was a woman back there.
My name is Catherine Searcy. I'm visiting from Austin, and one of my side projects is I work with or volunteer with the Texas Solar Energy Society, and we're a statewide educational nonprofit. And so our mission is actually to address a lot of the educational concerns that you all have raised. And I think last year we came up with like a one-page flyer of how the solar purchasing process works. Another one page on just how to be solar savvy and look out for some of the pitfalls in the process. So we would love to hear from utilities and all of the other players in the field on how to improve that offering, how to streamline it, and how to get the word out given that our focus is on education. So I'd like to talk with you afterwards. Thanks.
So you need a donation from everyone in this room, right?
That'd be great too.
To help with the expansion, because y'all do great work,
Just
but
feedback would be great.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Around the nation right now, what I found for solar installations, one of the inhibitors is actually the equalization value of homes, residential homes. And in many states, there's no standard law for assessing the value of a home. Very often when solar panels are added, the equalization value goes up and therefore the tax rate goes up, and it's a disincentive for installing solar currently. The state of Michigan and the Congress just this last month passed legislation almost unanimously to not, for all communities, not to reassess the value when solar panels are installed on the roof for residential and commercial buildings. It's not yet through the Senate and not yet signed by the governor, but we need more legislation like that around the nation if we want to help accelerate it.
Yeah, and I
reduce
think-
the financial impact.
Right. Austin has a property tax abatement for any value increase. Is that what you're talking about? Or you're,
That's one local community. The thing is, it's not consistent across the
right.
state
And, you know,
or across the nation.
right. So, I mean, if we could, I would advocate we do need to reassess the value based on solar, like have it be more valuable, but have the property tax abatement. Because you want to show that your house is more valuable, but you don't want to have to pay the tax on that. So, yeah.
I see Dr. Masood Amin back there. He's got a quick question.
Good morning. Thank you. Just to echo the colleague, my name is Masood Amin, University of Minnesota. Do you know if there's a national code for construction that incentivizes renewables, especially wind that is at the building level, or solar, rooftop, solar thermal, solar, any kind of solar? Because in Minnesota, the city of St. Paul is run predominantly by solar thermal. And that came out of the fact that St. Paul Power District is actually city-owned, and they have their destiny in their hand. Is there such an incentive or tax break nationally?
So the state of California, I don't know if you're talking about civic projects. So yeah, I was going to mention the California new regulation to put solar on all new homes, which everybody knows about. But I'm not aware of, I mean, I know there are individual communities where, you know, they've made the decision to be 100%. There are several, I think it's up to 200 or so, that made the commitment to be 100% clean energy. And so part of that is incorporating solar and storage in their municipalities, and also just the utility move toward solar plus storage. But I don't know, anybody else aware?
All that I know of is
Anybody in
local,
this audience
yeah.
aware? Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a movement among cities and states in some cases, because of the political climate we're in, have started to take more of an active role and say, you know, they're going to be 100% clean energy by 2030 or whatever it is. But, you know, then they have to develop the programs to back that up.
I think California just passed something that all new housing stock has to be built with
Yeah, that's
solar.
what I'm talking about.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of those are starting to pop up. Well, we've run out of time, so thank you all for your questions, and please join me in thanking our panelists. And we'll bring Aaron back up, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.